I've been there for close to 9 years, working in the operations space, working with OMI in its many forms, OML, OMW, SiteScope, NNM. So pretty much my whole domain has just been monitoring tools. So that's what I've been doing for the last 9 years. So let's jump right into this. What I'm going to show you is how to build a Vertica query, something a little bit simpler than what Brian was showing you, and then connecting to Vertica with Perl to execute that query and then posting that data to BVD. Our use case for that is, some of you are familiar with BVD, know that you do have a query data source option in BVD, but what we found with this customer is that it wasn't displaying how they wanted it to with the Sparkline widget, and it doesn't refresh if you leave the dashboard up. If you post the data manually every 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever it is you want to do, the widgets behave how they wanted. So even though they're constantly updating BVD and making it better, in this specific case, it wasn't acting how the customer wanted. So that was our use case there. Couple of assumptions for what I'm about to show you. We do expect you to have a little bit of scripting knowledge. The scripts that I have in the handout section, those are real, and I do use those, so go ahead and download those. I'll review those at the end. Just go over those real fast. They're not scripts. If you're new to Perl scripting, they're not scripts you'd write on the first day of learning Perl, but they're definitely not overly complicated. Some database knowledge is needed. You know, we're pulling the data from Vertica, but, you know, you could apply this to Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL. You know, it's basically just the same framework all the way around. And then general knowledge of command line utilities. We use curl to post the data to BVD, which is a really nice utility to be using. It's open source and very widely used. So in this use case, with some of the queries that we show you here are for getting operation agent data that's in OBA and Vertica out to BVD. But our use case also was some of the pieces of what Brian was showing you, getting transactions per second, the number of transactions, and the average transaction time committed over a minute or 10 minutes or an hour. So really any metric data that you have in any database, you know, you can throw up BVD. It's all JSON. Here's the Vertica help link. A really nice web page to navigate. It has a lot of good information there. When you're building your query to post your data to BVD, it's nice to visualize that. We've used DB Visualizer. It is a free download. They do have a pay-for version, but for what I was using it for, the free version worked quite well. It also has a built-in Vertica driver, so that's nice to have too. So here's a sample query that we have that was doing the disk byte rate against a server called slcvp nni.greenlightgroup.com. So that's my NNMI server in my dev environment. We're pulling that out and then posting that to BVD. Now, when you use the query, one thing that I got caught on was when you put that in the context of a script or something outside of your database query tool, you do need to put the ops to underscore default database because it can't find it. It doesn't really throw an error that's really readable. It says something about just table doesn't exist, so you have to point it to the right database. Now, time selection, what we did find as well when we were doing some of the data power transactions was that it does take about 90 seconds for OBA to process the data and get it into the right table. So what this where clause does with the timestamp is we found that if we chose data that was older than 2 minutes and newer than 3 minutes, so just in that 60 seconds, we would not get a null data set. So we could always make sure that we're posting the right data to BVD. You know, if you're just posting, you just want the latest, you know, CPU metric, then you could just take the last line in your or the first line in your query. But when you're trying to calculate metrics over time, you need to make sure that all of the data that you're looking at is actually there. So that was another kind of gotcha that we ran into. So that where clause should help you with that when you're doing that type of thing. So once you have your query built, you're getting the data that you want, we need to plug it into the Perl script. Of course, you can use whatever scripting language you're familiar with. But here's a good example of that. So how Perl works is it uses the OS ODBC driver and data source names to connect to your database. So I tried to use Linux. I'm not a Linux admin, so I had a hard time setting up the ODBC driver and data source name on a Linux box. So just for sake of time, we moved to Windows, and that was set up pretty easily. My background is Windows admin as well. So there's a link to download the client drivers. Again, my.vertica.com is a great website to navigate. It's really easy. So we'll take a closer look at this short script here. So again, not overly complicated. What this script will do is go ahead and connect to your Vertica database. So where we have Vertica DSN, that's where you would plug in what you called your data source name on your Windows or Linux box. And then the use DBI module just grabs that. If you plug in your user ID and password, I think for Vertica, it's dbadmin. dbadmin is the default. And then we have a fail message if we can't connect. Then we come down to where we say my query here. So that's where you put your Vertica query. And then the while loop, after you execute that, the while loop runs through that and puts it into an array. And then the print dumper command prints out your two-dimensional array to verify that you got the data from the database and it is now in your array. So again, not overly complicated. You can copy and paste this in, have in the handouts, and just run this to see if you've got everything configured right and are connecting to your Vertica database. So then we need to post the data to BVD. So there's two versions of BVD out there right now. There's a containerized version and your classic version, which is just the standalone server type. The URLs are a little bit different. The link I have there is for the full integration guide, but really it's the two pieces of information that you need to concentrate on. Your API key in BVD, you need to make sure that you log in as the admin, not a user who has admin privileges, but the actual admin, so that you can view the API key. On the right-hand side here, we click on the wrench, we go to API key, and then there's your key, and you plug that into your URL. So one thing we want to look at here, I have some highlighting on here that's kind of gone, so I'll talk through this. At the top here, we see our URL. So this is for a classic installation. By default, it uses port 12224 to post the data. The 5s represent where my API key would be. Now, up to the DIMS /, that's always going to be the same for anything you post to your BVD server. Everything to the right of DIMS / is going to be where you customize your data stream. So we have host, metric name, and Uncle Joe. So going down the left-hand side, we see DIMs are required in your JSON payload. So we see host equals our IP address, metric name equals server stats, and Uncle Joe equals live and kicking. So on the right-hand side, we see our data channel of our IP address, server stats, and live and kicking. So really, I threw Uncle Joe in there really to show you that it really is arbitrary to what you put in there. So whatever data stream it is you're putting in there, you can put whatever you need to make it unique and easy to find in BVD when you start attaching the data streams to your widgets. And just a word on the JSON file over here on the left. If you've worked with JSON, you know that that's not actually formatted correctly. We have the backslashes because we're talking in the context of a Perl script. So we have to escape the double quotes with the backslash. If you were to just create this file, and if you were to copy and paste what I have here and put it in a file, you would need to remove the backslashes, and then where we have the variables $, CPU utilization, $, physical memory used, you could just hard code a value there, just so you can understand how it works, and that's how you would format JSON. So again, but we're talking in the context of a Perl script. Now, how do we post the data? We use curl. This is an extremely widely used utility. for Windows and Linux. Also, Android phones use it for their web browsers, so it's really, really distributed very widely. You can download that at curl.hacks.se. So this is the curl command that we use. Again, the double backslashes are in context of the Perl script, but if you were to just do this on your own, just to try this command and post some data to BVD, you can just run this on the command line. You know, of course, substitute your BVD server name, your API key, and then where we have the $data file to hard code that with where your JSON file is. So what I'm going to do now is just review the two handouts really quickly. Let's share my screen here. Okay. So the first script, this is actually a real script that we're using in customer environment. You'll see here this starts out with the thing that we've already talked about, getting your data and then printing it out to make sure that you actually see your data. The thing where you'll need to have some scripting knowledge is I don't know what data you're going to pull. This just gives you an example of how to pull some data out of your two-dimensional array and putting it into a variable. Then we open our file handle, we write our data to our file. So right here we see our data file, and we declared that at the top. Right here, this is where my data file is. So we write our data. We open the file handle, and we write our data to it, and then we close our file handle. And then we post it to BVD using curl. We capture the result in a variable, and then we print that out so we can see what that would be. So if you get an HCP error, you get a 400 denied or something like that, you'll be able to see that. So again, not overly complicated, not going to be your first Perl script you ever write, but if you have any scripting experience, you'll see that there's not a ton here. The second script I have here is completely self-contained. This doesn't connect any data source. Basically, we just generate some random data and throw this to your BVD server. So if you're new to this whole thing and you want to see how it works, you can use this script as is. The only thing you really need to do is plug in your BVD host name and API key. Looks like did I lose the screen share? Yeah. It looks like, did I lose the screen share here? All right, let's stay there. Okay. You just need to plug in your host name and the API key, and this script will run. You just, any pathing that you need to adjust is fine. So I put this whole thing in a while loop, so it'll run 1,000,000 times. And then at the end of it, you see I post a bunch of data here. We sleep for 60 seconds, and we increment, and then we do it all again. So we'll run for 1,000,000 minutes. If you want to make that less, that's fine. You can just change this number here. So that's what I really wanted to show you, was just quick ways to get data into BVD from whatever data source you have. So obviously you could substitute a SQL Server data source in your script. You could substitute Oracle, to post your data over there. And these scripts right here, like I said, are examples that I'm using right now in customer environments, so they should work for you. That's all I have.
Great. Perfect timing. Thanks, Jay. So if you
no problem.
I want to thank everyone for bearing with us through all the technical difficulties, and we had a number of them. And as we work out the bugs of this new platform, thanks to the presenters for sharing their customer use case scenarios, which is what SIG Talk is all about. If you've got any questions, feel free to post them, and we'll get to them. We've seen a lot of the technical issues questions, and I think we're trying to resolve that. But if you've got questions for any of the presenters, feel free to add them here. And Chip, are you still on the line? Just wanted to check.
I am.
Chip, I think I've got a couple questions for you. One for sure. How is the eView? Where did it go here? And you may have already answered it. It was how is eView licensed?
Yeah, I did. I just typed an answer in there. The license is based on a physical mainframe system, regardless of how many logical partitions or the capacity of the system. It's just a single license per mainframe physical box.
Great. And then you have that other question, does eView work with COD or capacity on demand? I guess. I don't see the whole thing. But
And the answer is yes.
okay. That was tough. Let's see. Any other questions? We've got like 1 minute. Well, if you do, please feel free to send them to our Twitter site. But just to let you know, we've got an upcoming Vivit webinar in the IT operations space, single pane of glass solution from, I don't see it on here. I think it's Edge Technology or Edge. So that's coming up in July. And with that, please take the survey. If you can, let us know what you'd like to hear from other customers or partners or their experience with implementations. That's what this whole SIG talk is about, sharing customer customer and user experience type scripts and customizations and basically trying to make the products work so that you can fit your environment. So I think with that, we're done. Again, I want to thank everyone for hanging in there, as well as our speakers for job well done, and we'll see you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks.